Hello everyone, welcome back to ParsecGames, and today we're actually going to start our Five Nights at Freddy's 2 Scratch tutorial series, how to make a FNAF 2 game in Scratch. And what's going to be special about this is it's going to actually be in HD, so it's not going to have the pixelated look that most FNAF Scratch games have. It's actually going to be in high definition. And you might already see that this looks kind of different from your Scratch. The reason for that is that I'm actually using a plugin called Scratch Add-ons. And I've actually made a video about this extremely useful plugin, which you can watch by going into the iCard in the top right corner or going to the link in the description. So yeah, we're going to use this plugin for the tutorial. And in case you're not using it yet, start using it. It's extremely useful. It's probably the best plugin I've ever downloaded for my browser. And it's free, obviously. So yeah, I can really recommend it. And the second thing is we're going to be using the real textures and sounds from FNAF 2. I obviously don't own any of these. These are not made by me. I'm just using them as an example for educational purposes. You can use your own textures and sounds if you want to, or you can download the same ones that I'm using. I've also made a video on how to download those. The link to that is also in the iCard and in the description. So without further ado, let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to call this Five Nights at Freddy's 2. I'm going to specify that this is for a tutorial for my own sake. And I'm going to remove the scratch card here. We're not going to use that. Yep. And you'll have to excuse that some of these parts are actually in German for some reason. Like the plugin, the UI parts that are from the plugin are in German. So you'll just have to get used to that. But the rest of Scratch is in English, so I hope you'll be able to follow me. Yeah, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make the main menu today. And what we're going to need for that is, first of all, the screen that pops up when you boot up the game, which tells you that there's going to be jump scares and stuff in the game. So I just made a new empty sprite. And now we're just going to upload the image that we need for this, which is in this folder right here. And it's the texture with the number 574. Just going to delete the first costume. I'm going to call this warning. And now we're going to remove the gray parts. So just select fill and transparent, use the bucket tool and remove the gray parts. Okay, so now we've got that. Now we're going to make it so that this hides when the flag is clicked. And we're going to add a new event when I receive, create a new message. We're going to call this boot up underscore warning. When I receive that, it's going to show, go to the middle of the screen, so X and Y 0. And we're going to set the size to 100 for now, and we'll check which size this needs in a moment. We're going to call the sprite boot up warning, just like the message. You can name it whatever you want, but I'm just going to use that name. And in the stage, we're going to change the background color to black. So to do that, we're just going to convert it to a bitmap, select black as our color, and just fill the whole costume with that. And now when this thing is going to receive the boot up warning message, it's going to show up like this. And now we're going to change the size to, let's say, 150. Yeah, 150 looks pretty good. So that's going to appear for 2 seconds. So after it does this, it's going to wait for 2 seconds. Then repeat 10 times, change the brightness effect by -10, which is going to make it fade down nicely into black. And when it's black, it should send out a new broadcast called new message main menu. And now to make sure that this actually appears at the start of the game, we're going to have to set the brightness effect to 0 when it shows up. And we're going to go to the backdrop and make it so that when the flag is clicked, we're going to send out boot up warning. And I'm making this kind of, I could have just made it so the boot up warning shows up when the flag is clicked, but I want to have complete control over what happens at what point. So we're just going to sort of compartmentalize this whole thing into this message here. When we broadcast main menu, obviously nothing's happening right now because nothing receives that message. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make a new sprite once again. and we're going to call this one main menu animatronics. And now we're going to go to import once again, but this time we're not going to upload the costume just normally. We're going to upload it in HD. And we're going to look into the Office Nights and Menu folder and menu, miscellaneous, and this should contain the 4 frames of the animatronics. And as you can see now, they're actually imported in HD instead of the way that Scratch normally imports these images, which is 480 by 360. Instead, this is actually uploaded in its original resolution, and that's why the sprite right now is actually way too big for the stage, because the stage is only 480 by 360 pixels, and the image, as I said, is in its original resolution. So what we're going to have to do is, first of all, when the flag is clicked, this sprite should obviously hide, and then when main menu is received, it should show up. And now we're just going to test out different sizes to check what size it should have at that point. So let's set it to 50 maybe, 45. And don't forget to center it once again. Now setting the size to 45, we can see slight black bars at the top and the bottom. And if we set it to 50, those should be gone. Now we're going to not have it centered completely, because one task we're going to have with making this Scratch remake is actually completely refitting the game into a 4:3 aspect ratio. So as you probably could tell, the normal real game is actually in 16:9, which is the normal aspect ratio today. And for some reason, Scratch still uses 4:3, so we're going to have to adapt all the textures a little bit to make them still fit into the 4:3 format of Scratch, while still retaining the relative aspect ratio and size of 16:9. So the way we're going to do that is we're just going to fiddle around a little bit with these coordinates, maybe 35, maybe, yeah, I think 30 should be okay. And now we're going to just switch between costumes just to check that they all look all right. And they do. Maybe we'll move it to the left a little bit more so that Freddy isn't completely cut off. So now this should be the final when I receive message. It's just showing up, setting the size to 50, and going to X25 and Y0. And now we're going to have a new variable, which is going to be a very important variable, which we're going to call status. And this variable is going to be the variable which we always use to determine what status the game is in right now. So what's happening in the game, basically what's happening in the game. So we're going to go over back to the boot up warning sprite, and we're going to set the variable status to boot up warning. Just going to write it like this, so that we know, okay, right now it's booting up, showing the warning message. And as soon as it switches to the main menu, we should set the status to main menu, of course. So let's try that out. Right now it's set to boot up warning, and now it switches to main menu after 2 seconds. Now, when you're actually in the real main menu in the real game, you probably know that the animatronics keep twitching around a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a forever loop, or repeat until loop. And we're going to repeat until the status is no longer main menu. Meaning, when the main menu starts, we just saw that it switches to the status to main menu. So this is going to be true at the beginning, so that it repeats. But as soon as, let's say, as you've decided not to be in the main menu anymore, these should stop twitching around, because then it's not needed anymore. So we're going to add in here, switch to costume 215, and we're gonna change the names a little bit, because I want to be able to know what's happening in which. So we're gonna call this one 0, because none of the animatronics are twitching. This one's gonna be called Freddy, because Freddy is the one opening his mouth. This one's gonna be called Chica, and this one's gonna be called Bonnie. Just so we know what we're doing right here. So we're gonna switch to 0 usually, and then we're gonna wait a random number between, let's say, 0.5 and 2 seconds, and we're going to switch to costume a random number between 1 and 4, and then wait again. Now this second wait time is obviously way too long, because as you could see, the Chica animatronic moved and it didn't move it back anymore for quite a bit. So we're going to change this to maybe 0.05 and 0.15 or so that they only twitch very shortly and then switch back to the original. And we're going to change this wait time to maybe up to 3 seconds. And the reason I picked random from 1 to 4 and not 2 to 4 is because I want to have the chance that maybe it doesn't switch at all after the wait time is over and it just stays with the original 0. Because this is 1 to 4 is 0 to Bonnie, and 2 to 4 would guarantee that we choose one of these 3, but I want to make it so sometimes it doesn't twitch at all, so that it's not as regular. Yeah, so now they're twitching around in the background, which looks very nice. The next thing we're going to need is the main menu title, and we're going to add that once again using a new sprite. I'm going to call that main menu game title. And we're going to import a new costume, and this doesn't have to be in HD because the actual original texture isn't any larger than 480 by 360, so it wouldn't make any difference. So we're just going to import from logos once again and choose the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 logo. Going to remove the first costume, and just like we did with the boot up warning, we're going to select the fill tool, set the fill to transparent, and remove the gray parts. And you might be able to notice that there's a little bit of gray around the 5 for some reason. We can use the eraser to get rid of some of that, but I don't think that's going to be too noticeable. So I think we can just keep that, and it's not going to make a big difference because the background is black anyways, and you won't really notice the transition between the white of the letters and the black of the background. If there's a little bit of gray, it doesn't really matter. So we're just going to keep it that way. And once again, when the flag is clicked, we're going to hide the sprite, and when we receive the main menu message, it's going to show up. And now once again we're going to test out the size and position that we're going to need. So we're going to set the size and position inside this for loop just to test it out. Let's set the size to 50 maybe 65. Yeah, 65 looks about right. Now we're going to align it to the left by setting the X to minus 130 and the Y to, let's say, 80. Let me move this status variable out of the way. And as you can see, that already looks pretty good. But you can actually see a little bit of gray down here next to the F. So I'm just going to remove that because that is bothering me a little bit. Yeah, that looks better. And as you can see, there's no way you're going to tell if there's gray next to the letters here. You don't really see it. So it doesn't really matter. I might make it a little bit smaller just so the S doesn't go over Chico's face because I don't like the way that looks. Just going to set it to 60 and align it further to the left and a little bit further up. Yeah, that looks right. Okay, so now what we're going to do is actually, as you can tell, we've already made 3 sprites just for what we've got here, which is not a lot. And we don't want to have that many sprites because it's going to get really annoying. When we have too many sprites and you're looking for one specific sprite, that's going to be a lot of sprites to look through to find the one you actually want to use. So what we're going to do here is something that I've started doing recently in Scratch projects, and it saves you a ton of sprites, and it's actually not very complicated to implement at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new variable inside the main menu game title sprite. And this variable, this is very important, this variable is going to be for this sprite only. And we're just going to call it myType. You can call it whatever you want, but that's the name that I use. And now this myType variable has the important property that only this sprite can access it. And what's more important is that the value assigned to this variable is different for each clone of this sprite. This is very important. So we're just going to set myType to main at the start of the game when the flag is clicked, when this sprite doesn't have any clones yet. So that the real sprite itself, which is not a clone, which is the original parent sprite, has the type myType main. And now we're going to make it so that if myType is main, this part is executed. So right now this doesn't make any difference because as I've said, this doesn't have any clones yet, and it sets my type to main when the flag is clicked, so this doesn't really make any difference so far. But what we're going to do now is we're actually going to make clones of this sprite, and which we're going to do by using create clone of myself. And we're going to set my type to start first, and then continue, and then we're going to set it back to main. And it's only going to do this if its type is main, so that the clones don't do this if they ever receive this message. We're just making sure that the clones don't do this, because otherwise the clones would clone themselves again, and we'd have a lot of clones. We don't want that. We're just going to make it so that if this sprite receives the main menu message, it's going to make a clone of itself with the type start, going to make a clone of itself with the type continue, and then, and this is very important, switch back its type to main, so that the sprite doesn't forget that it's the main sprite. And now we're going to make it so that when I start as a clone, the clone first checks what its type is. So let's say if my type is start, and now we're going to have to import the textures for that. So once again, we don't need HD textures, we just need the bitmap textures of that. We're going to import the new game and continue buttons, open those, and now we're going to use the bucket tool once again to remove the gray parts, just like before. And the same with the continue costume. Okay, now we're going to actually name these new game, continue, and this one's going to be title. And now we're going to make it so that the main sprite switches to title. We're going to call this new game instead of start. Sorry, that was my mistake, choosing the wrong name. Obviously these names are completely arbitrary. You can use any name you want, but I'm just going to use new game because the costume name is also new game, and it says new game on the sprite so that it's easier for us to remember. And if the type of the clone is continue, we're going to switch to continue. And of course, these clones also need to show up, because when the flag is clicked, their parent is actually hidden, and it's still hidden when it clones itself. And the clones, when they start, are exactly a copy of the state that the main sprite was in the moment that it clones itself, meaning that they're also hidden when they start up. So we need to add a show here as well. We could also just move the show up here, but I'm just going to keep it this way so that we have control over when the clones actually start showing. So now if we start the game again, you can see the warning screen is going to turn to black. And now you can see we have the new game and continue buttons, but they're kind of jumbled in there because we haven't added their positioning yet. So we're just going to copy this forever loop with the size and X and Y position into each of the clones scripts. Going to restart it again. And now we're going to be able to set for each of the clones the exact position we want them to be at. So let's try out size 100 for a new game and X minus 100 maybe. No, you can already see 100 is too large. So we're going to try out 85. Looks a little bit better. We're going to move it down a bit. Further down, maybe to minus 40, yeah. And set the X to minus 130, 140. Yeah, it's still a little bit too big in my opinion. So let's set it to 80 or 75. Yeah, 75. And set the X to minus 145 and the Y to minus 60. Yeah, that looks about right. Now we're just going to choose the exact same values for the continue. Except obviously we need to set the Y a little bit lower because it's supposed to be beneath the new game button. So maybe set it to minus 90, no, minus 100, maybe minus 95. Yeah, I think minus 100 looks okay. Yeah, so now we have these two buttons. They don't have any functionality yet, but they're here now. And despite having these new buttons, we didn't have to create any new sprites. It's all in this main menu sprite, and for that reason we're going to rename the main menu sprite to main menu texts, just to make clear what that is. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to make the rest of the main menu, which is there's a copyright of Scott Cawthon down here, which we're also going to add. So we're just going to go into the costumes of the same sprite once again and upload a new costume. And this is going to be 253, which is 2014 Scott Cawthon copyright. Now let's remove the gray parts once again. Let's call the costume copyright. And now adding this to the main menu is very easy. We just need to copy this part right here, setting the type to copyright, and creating a clone once again. Add this in before it switches back to the type being main. And now on the clone side, we just need to add in a new if clause called if my type equals copyright. It should switch to the copyright costume. And we're once again going to have to test out the X and Y position and the size. So let's restart the game so that this clone is actually created. And as you can see, it's jumbled in there because right now it has the exact same position and size as the new game sprite, which we don't want. So let's set the X to 145 and the Y to minus 110. No, 170 maybe. Yeah, and set the X to 150. And that way we have it right here in the corner. Remove the forever part from that. And now we have these right here. And now what we're going to do is we actually have to move the new game and continue button a little bit to the right, because there actually needs to fit an arrow next to them. So we're going to move them to maybe minus 138, minus 138. And notice that they didn't move now. This is because it's no longer in a forever loop. And this is just executed when the clone is created and then never executed again. So we need to actually restart the game for the clones to move further to the right. Yeah, we're just going to have to test out how far we move them to the right. But once again, we're going to import a new costume. Doesn't have to be HD, just the normal bitmap, and choose 229. And once again, remove the gray parts from that. Okay, and we'll call that select. And now, once again, we're just going to copy this part right here, set the type to select, and create a clone of itself before switching back to main. And once again, we're going to copy a part from this, call it select, switch the costume to select, and add a for loop around the position and size. And we're also going to add a for loop around the position and size of new game and continue, so that we can adjust the X position of these two so that the arrows can still fit to the left of them. So let's restart the game so that this clone, the new clone with select, is also created. And we're going to have to move it, definitely have to move it further to the left. And I'd say it's a little bit too big, maybe set it to size to 65. And the X to minus 1, maybe minus 200, no, minus 220. Yeah, maybe minus 220 looks good. And set the size to minus 60. Yep. And now, as you can see, we definitely need to move the new game and continue further to the right in order for these arrows to actually fit there. So let's set it to maybe minus 130, minus 120. Yeah, minus 115. Okay. And now, I don't like that the continue and new game buttons touch Chica so much, so we're just going to make them a little bit smaller, maybe size 70. And because they're rescaled from the center, we actually need to move them left again a little bit, so minus 120 should be all right for the X position of these two. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're actually going to add behavior for these buttons and for the arrow. So what we're going to do is we're going to once again add a repeat until loop and have it repeat until the status is no longer main menu, so that these buttons will only be clickable as long as the main menu is shown. And we're going to do it for new game first. And what we're going to do now is we're going to check. What we're going to do now is we're going to check if the mouse is hovering over the sprite. And now you might think that we're going to use touching mouse pointer, but the problem with this is that it's only going to react if your mouse pointer is actually touching the sprite. And this sprite is only the white parts, it's only the text. So if you're actually pointing right here, for example, it's not going to actually register your mouse hovering over it, because you're not actually touching the sprite. You're touching the background. If you had your mouse over here, you're touching it, but over here you're not touching it, and that's going to be really annoying if you want to just click new game and you really need to move your mouse right on the text to click it. So we're not going to use that. We're not going to use touching mouse. Instead, what we're going to use is we're actually going to use the X and Y position of the mouse. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an and in here and two ands inside that, and we're going to add a smaller, larger than, smaller than, larger than, smaller than in here. And now we're just going to add in mouse X into the first two larger and smaller, and mouse Y into the last two larger and smaller. And this way we can check if the X position of the mouse is between these two values, and at the same time the Y position of the mouse has to be in between these two values. So now we're going to check which X values that should be. So we're going to move the mouse around, and with the Scratch add-ons plugin you can actually see the mouse position up here as numbers. So let's say -200 should be the minimum X position of the mouse, and the maximum X position should be -38. And now the mouse Y is going to be interesting because we want to make it so that we can reuse this for continue. And if we set absolute values, like for example -70 and -50, then this is not going to work for continue. This is only going to work for a new game. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the X position of the clone relative to the mouse. So what I mean by that is that we're going to check if the Y position of the clone plus a certain amount is greater than the mouse Y and smaller than the mouse Y than another value. So what we're going to do is we're going to just have it say, this is repeating, remember? So if we restart the game now, this is going to be repeating and saying hello. What we're going to do now is we're going to have it display the Y position plus nothing. So right now it's -60 because that's what we set here. Now we want it so that it reacts if the mouse is at, let's say, -45. So what we have to do to get from -60 to -45, we just add 15. So 15 is what we're going to add in here, because we want it to react if the mouse position is smaller than the position of the clone plus 15, which would be 45. So we want the mouse Y to be lower than 45, and we want it to be higher than, let's say, -75. And if you actually check it, the Y position -15 is exactly -75. So we're just going to add -15 in here. And this is a very elegant way of programming this, because what we can do now is that we're actually going to take this whole repeat until part in here and move it out of there, get the when I start as a clone part, and check whether the type is new game or the type is continue. So both the continue and new game clones are going to be executing this repeat until function here. And because we made it so that they actually react to the mouse position relative to their own position instead of absolute values, this actually works for both of them using a single script, which is very elegant. So what we're going to do now is, just to check that this works, we're going to make it so that if you're hovering over them, they're going to say hello. And if you're not hovering over them, they're not going to say hello. Now what we need to do is we need to restart it, obviously, because this hasn't applied yet to the new clones. But now we're going to try it out. And as you can see, whenever you're hovering over them, they say hello. And if you're not hovering over them, they're not saying hello. And now these two clones are using this single script, and it works for both of them, which is great. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make a new list called main menu hover. And at the beginning, when the main menu is received, when the main menu message is received, we're going to delete everything from main menu hover and just add 0 and 0 to that. We're going to see why in a moment. I'm just going to execute this just to see that the list now has these two list elements, 0 and 0. And now what we're going to do is that each of these elements is going to represent whether you're hovering over one of these buttons. So if you're hovering new game, this is going to turn from 0 to 1. And if you're hovering continue, the second element is going to turn from 0 to 1. And if you're not hovering any of them, they're just going to be 0. So how are we going to do this? Well, it's pretty simple. We're just going to add an if clause in here and check whether my type is new game. And in that case, we're gonna replace item 1 of main menu hover with 1. And if it's not new game, the only other possibility is that this is the continue clone, because those were the two possibilities that we set over here at the top. So we're going to replace item 2 with 1. So let's try that out. If I'm going to hover over new game, as you can see, that just switched to 1. Now I'm going to hover over continue, and that also switched to 1. But they're not switching back because we haven't added that yet. So we're going to remove this say nothing part, copy this my type new game part, add it in here, and just replace the 1 with the 0, so that if you're not hovering over it, which is this part of the if else clause, it replaces the item that needs to be replaced with a 0. So now what we can see if we look at the list is that it corresponds perfectly to which one you're hovering over. And now, what did I make this for? What's the use of this list, you might be asking? Well, the arrow right here should be invisible if you're not hovering over either of these. And if you are hovering on one of these, it should switch to that one, to the location of that one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the my type equals select branch of the clone, so that we're only changing the script for the arrow. I'm going to add an in repeat until not status equals main menu, so that it only does it while we're in the main menu. And in this, we're going to check if main menu hover equals 0, 0, which is the case when there's nothing selected here. And by the way, this is a weird way of doing it, but it's okay, you can do it. Is using a list as a string, as a number of, as a collection of characters, because if you click on it, you can actually see that 0, 0, it just appends the values inside the list into one value. So you can do it this way. And we're going to do it so that if the main menu hover list is 0, 0, meaning you're not hovering over either of them, the arrow is going to hide. And if you are hovering on one of them, it's going to show. And it's going to set the Y coordinate based on which one you're hovering on. So we're going to actually change this. We're going to set it, make it so that the X is set up here and the Y value is set down here in the part that that reacts to your hovering. So we're going to remove this, and now we're just going to make it so that if main menu hover equals 1, 0, it's going to set the Y to -60, and if if it's not 1, 0, meaning it has to be 0, 1, because we already checked 0, 0 up here, and those are all the possible combinations. And now to know what we need to set the Y to in order to have the arrow next to the continue button, we're just going to check the Y position of the continue button, which is -100. So we're going to set the Y to -100 in that case. Now this is not doing anything yet because the clone which we created didn't have the repeat until loop yet. So we're just going to restart the game, and now it should actually, the arrow should actually react to which one you're hovering over. Yeah. So now we can just hide the list, hide all these variables. And as you can see, we already have a new game and continue button which are working. Well, at least you can hover over them. They're not working yet, but you can hover over them. So now I'm not sure if this is the case in the original game, but I think it looks kind of strange to have them floating around, not aligned to the left corner when you're not actually hovering them. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the X position of these buttons be based on whether they're being hovered or not. So we're going to go over here and set the X to -120 when you're hovering them, either of them, because that's the X we have chosen right now, and that's the X position which is correct for when they're being hovered. And now we're going to set the X to something different when they're not being hovered. So let's say, for example, -150. So now if you hover over it, it scoots over to the right to make place for the arrow, and if you're not hovering over one of them, it doesn't react. And now we need to actually fix something that we did before, which is that the minimum mouse X is actually too high, because as you can see, if I'm hovering over here, it doesn't react yet, because the mouse is at minus 230. So it only starts reacting when I'm over here. So we're going to make it so that it starts reacting when the mouse is greater than minus 230. And now it's really great that we did this in one script, because otherwise I would have to go into the scripts for both of these buttons and change that value. This way I just need to change it over here, and it already works for both buttons the same, which is awesome. So this is something that you should really keep in mind when you're making games, is that whenever two objects in the game are basically doing the same thing, you're probably going to be able to make them use one script, which does the same thing for the most part, and just small exceptions for each of them. See, like this is the same script for both buttons. The only exception is the Y position that the mouse has to be at, and which element of the list to change in that case. Otherwise, they use the exact same script, which once again, like the example I just gave, makes it really elegant and easy to change these sort of values if they're not right. Obviously, an important part which should never miss in a FNAF game is obviously static, and you need a lot of it. So we're just going to make a new sprite called static, and we're going to import once again, and this doesn't have to be in HD, it can be in just bitmap, and this should be in the monitor and cameras folder and in the static folder. Just choose these pictures right here, import them, and now once again hide this when the flag is clicked. And now what we're going to do is that actually we're going to make it so that we're going to use this static sprite for every time there's going to be static in the game. So this isn't just for the main menu, it's going to be for every other occurrence of static. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make a new variable called static, and I'm just going to write it big so that we remember that this is for all occurrences of static. This isn't just one static, if that makes sense. And we're going to check whether static equals 1. And in that case, the static is going to show and set the size to 100 and go to x0 and y0, and otherwise it's going to hide. And this way, whenever we want static in the game, we can just set the variable to 1 and it will magically appear out of nowhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the main menu text sprite, and when the main menu starts, we obviously want to set static to 1. And when the game starts, we're going to set static to 0 on the boot up. Now, as you can see, the static doesn't look quite right. It's not moving. So we need to add the next costume block into the static's forever loop. And now it's moving. And as you can see, the static is a little bit too strong. And what we're going to do for that is we're going to add in a new variable called static underscore opacity. And we're going to set the ghost effect of this sprite to that variable. And now for each time that we set the static to on, we can also set the opacity customizable in that moment. So let's set it to maybe 35 or so, or maybe set it to 50. Yeah, so we're gonna have it set to 50 when the main menu starts. And now, as you can see, the static is in front of the buttons, which we don't want. So what we need to do to fix that is actually very simple. We're just gonna add in a new occurrence of the when I start as a clone sprite, and add in repeat until the status is no longer main menu, and just have them go to the front layer. And we're also going to add this to the main part of the sprite, because as you recall, the main part was the one that showed the logo of the game, and we also want to have that in front of the static, so we need to add that here as well. So let's restart the game. And as you can see now, the game's logo and the buttons and the copyright are all in front of the static, and this is starting to look really good. Now, what we're also going to do is, and this is going to be pretty useful later, is we're going to add another variable called static underscore layer. And within the static sprite, we're just going to make it so that it goes to the front layer at each repetition of this part, and then go backwards static layer layers. So what this does is that later on, when we don't want any elements in front of the static, we're going to set the static layer to 0 so that the static is right at the front, because that way it goes to the front layer and then goes backwards 0 layers so that it is at the front layer. But if you want to have, for example, 5 elements in front of that the static, we can just make the static go to static layer 5, for example, and that way it's going to go to the layer number 5. So we're going to go back to the main menu text sprite and set the static layer to 1, because we don't want to have it on the front layer. We want to have it go 1 layer back from the front. And we're going to also have the main menu animatronics go to the back layer, because there doesn't need to be anything in front of these. And now you can actually see a problem, which I didn't think about, which is that the warning sign is actually still visible when the main menu starts. That was a little bug that I didn't think about. So let's add a hide in here after the main menu is broadcast, and also add a go to front layer when the boot up starts, just to make sure that it's at the front. Yeah. And now what we're going to want to do is actually I'm going to move the part here which sets the static. I'm going to move that into the boot up warning, so that this is already set right when the main menu starts. So that because as I could tell, there was like 2 frames where the static wasn't there yet when the main menu started, and I don't like the look of that. So let's restart it, and now the static should start right when the main menu starts. Yeah. Okay, so now one thing that's still missing is whenever there's a transition in FNAF games, there's always a short camera error, like a little analog. I don't know what to call it. It's static, but it's different. Anyways, we're just going to add that now. So we're going to make a new sprite once again. Import costumes once again. These don't have to be HD. These can be bitmap. And these should be in other, static, and the 1 folder. So we're going to import those. Yeah, as you can see, these are these white bars that show up whenever there's a transition. So we're going to have these hide when the flag is clicked. Hide. Now we're going to make a new event called analog transition. And when this is received, this should go to the front. Set the size to 100. Go to the center of the screen. Go to the front layer. This is also important. And repeat maybe 3 times. Switch to costume. How many other? 5. Pick random number from 1 to 5. And then have it hide again. And also have the go to front layer be inside this loop, so that while it's showing up, it's always at the front layer. And maybe just make it so this is next costume and not random costume, because that way it could switch to the same costume twice, and that looks kind of strange. So let's just have it go to the next costume. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And now obviously the iconic sound of this is missing. So this is going to be the first sound that we add. So go into the sounds tab of this sprite, which by the way we're going to call analog transition. Remove the pop sound, which is in every sprite for some reason, and upload a new sound. I just looked through all these sounds, and apparently the sound that we're looking for actually isn't in this folder. So that's actually a sound that's missing from this collection, which is kind of sad. I think it has everything else except this sound for some reason. So we're going to get this sound from somewhere else, which is, if you look into the description, there's going to be a link to a video which I did a couple of years ago, which showed you how to download the FNAF and sounds and textures from a different website, and we're going to use those just for this one sound. So I have these over here, and it's going to be Blip 3, I think. Yeah. And that's going to play whenever we do this transition. Yeah, that looks great. Okay, so once again, you're going to have to get this you're going to have to completely download all of the sounds from FNAF 1 just to get the Blip 3 sound effect. I'm sorry for that. But yeah, just for accuracy, we're going to have to use this one. Okay, so now when we open the main menu, we're going to want to have this transition. So we're going to send the analog transition broadcast right before we send out the main menu broadcast. So let's try out what that looks like. Yeah. And now obviously what's also missing is the music. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the animatronics be responsible for the music. Remove this random pop sound once again. And now the music should be in the FNAF2 audio folder, which we downloaded originally. And it's going to be called Stone Temple, I think. Oh, no, the Sand Temple Loop G. Yeah, that's the famous FNAF 2 main menu music. And we're going to have it repeat until the status is no longer main menu. Just repeat that sound until it's done. And set the volume to 100 when the main menu is opened. Yeah, so now that's what it's like with the music and the static effect. And now we're also going to make the buttons actually do something. So we're going to go back into the main menu text sprite and make it so that these buttons react to being pressed. We're going to add this right here. I'm just going to mute the music. I cannot talk with the music in the background. I'm going to add an if clause into this part right here, which was responsible for if they're being hovered. We're going to add in if the mouse down is pressed, mouse down. And then we're going to wait until the mouse is no longer pressed so that we can't trigger this twice by accident if we press the mouse for too long. And then we're going to send out, and then we're going to check if my type equals new game. We're going to send out a new message called main menu.new game. And otherwise, meaning we're pressing continue, we're going to broadcast main menu.continue. Okay, so that's the main menu so far. I don't think I forgot anything. And making the new game and continue buttons actually do something, except broadcasting is going to be in the next video, along with having you actually start the new game. So the newspaper animation transition shows up, and then having you actually start in the office. That's going to be the next video in this tutorial series. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I could help you a little bit. I hope you're still interested in learning how to do FNAF 2 in 2022, 8 years after the game came out. Yeah, if you have any suggestions, what you'd like to see in this series, if there's anything I forgot to add in the FNAF 1 tutorial series, please let me know. I could add that still. I can start the FNAF 2 tutorial series and still continue the FNAF 1 tutorial series as well. So if you have any suggestions or any video you want to see me do, just tell me and I might do it. So as I said, I hope this was helpful for you. And if you want to see more tutorials like this, make sure to like and subscribe, and there will be more coming very soon. Until then, see you in the next video.